Big Shaq was challenged to a chess match just to be mocked. A punchline in a game he wasn't supposed to understand. The crowd laughed, the cameras rolled, and the board was set like a stage for humiliation. But when Big Shaq moved the first piece, the silence was louder than any cheer. This wasn't just a game anymore, it was a reckoning. And every move after that, regret unfolding square by square. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. They called him a legend, a titan, a millionaire with a grin that could melt the tension off a courtroom bench. But few ever stopped to look past the towering frame and the championship rings. Few saw the man who woke before sunrise in a quiet Atlanta suburb, brewed a single cup of black coffee, and sat in the silence for a long time, like he was listening to something the rest of the world forgot how to hear. Shaquille O'Neal wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. The courts, the cameras, the lights, they'd had their time. But for Shaq, it wasn't about the spotlight. Not now. These days, it was about the moments that didn't get posted. The ones that couldn't be measured in views or dollars. It was about the mornings at the West Park Community Center, where a chalk-dusted board sat waiting, and a dozen kids lined up before the doors even opened.
Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Shaq parked his matte black SUV by the side entrance and carried in two things: a box of used chessboards and a sack of warm breakfast sandwiches he picked up from a small diner on 12th Street. The kids called him Coach, though he never told them to. He didn't need to. They knew the weight he carried, even when he wasn't trying to throw it around.
There was something about watching him lean over a chessboard, fingers lightly adjusting a pawn, explaining why patience beats power. That's what made the kids listen. Not the fame, not the money. It was the gentleness, a kind of quiet authority that came from someone who'd learned to sit with his own anger and shape it into something useful. He never brought up the NBA. If someone asked, he smiled, maybe shared a story if it taught something. But mostly, he listened to their frustrations, their problems, their dreams. He taught them how to plan 5 moves ahead, not just on the board, but in life, to protect their queen like they'd protect their mother, to understand that every piece, no matter how small, had value. It wasn't about chess, not really. It was about showing kids who were written off by the world that their minds could be sharp, dangerous, beautiful things. But for all the peace Shaq found in that room, outside those walls, the world hadn't changed as much as he'd hoped. People still stared too long when he walked into certain restaurants. Security guards still followed too close in high-end stores. At a charity gala last winter, a hedge fund CEO drunkenly asked if he'd ever tried reading Nietzsche, said it with a smirk, like the joke was in thinking someone like Shaq could even spell the name. Shaq laughed it off, he always did. But later, alone in his truck, the silence wasn't so peaceful. See, the thing is, people saw the giant, but they never bothered to ask what the giant saw. They didn't know about the nights he'd drive through the poorest neighborhoods just to remember, or how he anonymously funded therapy sessions for boys whose fathers were locked up or long gone. They didn't know he once paid off a school's entire lunch debt, not for a press headline, but because he'd once gone hungry too. Still, no matter how many lives he touched, there were always those who saw nothing but a walking stereotype. A black man too big to be soft, too rich to be serious, too famous to be thoughtful. Even when he was dressed in his usual hoodie and joggers. No gold, no flash. People crossed the street. Mothers held their purses tighter. Waiters checked twice before assuming he could afford the wine list. And yet he never snapped. Not in public. Not once. Because he knew something they didn't. That dignity could be a weapon. That patience, real patience, wasn't weakness. It was restraint, wrapped around the urge to set the world on fire. He remembered what his mother Lucille used to tell him as a boy, back when the world seemed colder and the food stamps thinner. Baby, you don't gotta shout to be heard by the ones who matter. So Shaq made his voice count in other ways. He showed up, again and again. When the city cut funding for after-school programs, he built his own. When a kid's father got locked up and the boy stopped coming to chess class, Shaq showed up at the boys' school and sat in the back row all morning, just so the kid would know someone still saw him. It wasn't flashy, but it mattered. Still, the world kept poking at him, testing him. Like that Tuesday morning at the coffee shop off Peachtree Street. A place with $9 espresso and minimalist jazz floating through the air. Shaq was sitting outside with Lucille, both sipping lattes and sharing a cinnamon roll. He wore a baseball cap low, hoping to pass through the day unnoticed. That's when they showed up. 4 of them, young and loud and polished like Wall Street interns, trying too hard. They took the table beside him, laughed a little too hard. One of them, a tall blonde kid in a salmon pink button-down, leaned back and said just loud and, "Man, can you imagine him playing chess? Bet he thinks a rook is some kind of bird." They all laughed. Lucille's hand went still around her cup. Shaq didn't flinch. He stared at the board between him and his mother. 2 half-played games. His king still safe. His bishop lying in wait. Lucille looked at him, calm but sharp. "Don't give him the power," she said, not in warning, but in wisdom. Shaq nodded once. The kind of nod that didn't mean surrender. It meant wait. Because what the kid in the pink shirt didn't know, what most of them didn't know, was that Shaq had spent more hours in silence than they had in luxury. That chess had saved him long before basketball ever did. That when he was 13 and too angry to speak without yelling, it was a janitor named Willard who sat him down in a storage closet with a board and told him, "This game will teach you how to win without throwing a punch." He learned fast, and he never forgot. Back at the community center, the kids knew this story. Though he never told it in full, they could see it in the way he moved the pieces. How he always sacrificed the knight when it mattered. How he never rushed his endgame, and how he always played until the king was tipped over by the other hand. He taught them that winning wasn't about domination. It was about outlasting the chaos, about thinking through the insult, and still playing your best move. So when the laughter at the cafe faded, and the pink-shirted boy finally turned and made eye contact, he got a look he wasn't expecting. Not rage. Not hurt. Just patience. The kind of patience that made you nervous. The kind of silence that said, "I'm not here to prove I'm better. I'm here to remind you that I already know who I am."
That was Big Shaq.
The man behind the name. The giant who didn't need to raise his voice because his legacy whispered louder than their arrogance ever could. And somewhere in the back of his mind, as the wind stirred the edge of the chessboard and Lucille quietly made her next move, Shaq thought, "Let them laugh now. They won't be laughing when I move my first piece." Grayson was the first to laugh. His voice had that sharp, educated cruelty that came from classrooms that valued test scores over character. Brody followed, his laugh quicker, more desperate, like he was always auditioning for approval. Celeste and Holt stayed quiet, but their eyes darted toward Shaq with interest. That toxic kind, the kind that dances between fascination and mockery. Lucille felt it before Shaq said anything. The way his shoulders tightened slightly, the shift in his breath. "You see what I see?" she asked, low enough for only him to hear. He didn't answer. Grayson's voice cut through the air like a knife dressed in silk. "I mean, seriously, what's he doing here? Don't those types usually hang around clubs, not cafes?" Brody laughed. "Bet he thinks a Sicilian defense is something you order with marinara." Celeste giggled nervously. Holt smirked but said nothing. Shaq didn't move. His hands stayed where they were, fingers lightly resting on his coffee cup, which was still warm. His sunglasses made it impossible to tell whether he was looking at them or past them. But Lucille knew. Her son noticed everything. "Baby," she said gently, her voice layered with decades of wisdom. "This ain't about the game. It's about what they think you can't be." Shaq breathed out slowly. His thumb tapped once on the table, the rhythm he always used when he was calculating. Not anger, not revenge, but clarity. The same focus he used when explaining to his kids at the center why rushing a move could cost them the whole board. He didn't need to respond. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Not now. Grayson, emboldened by the lack of reaction, kept going. "Big guy probably thinks a rook is some kind of truck," he muttered to his friends. Lucille shot him a look, not Grayson, but her son. That quiet, knowing look that said, "Let them talk. Their noise ain't worth your peace." Shaq slowly turned his head, not fully, just enough for Grayson to know that he was now aware fully and sharply. The laughter at their table dipped for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough for Grayson to lose a bit of his rhythm. He turned back to his group and mumbled something quieter. Shaq went back to his sandwich. But inside, something had shifted. Not rage. Not hurt. A calculation. A memory logged and marked for later. Not to retaliate, but to respond intentionally. And publicly. Lucille leaned forward and whispered, "They think you won't show 'em how you move." Shaq smiled. Just a corner of his mouth. "They'll see." They finished their lunch in peace. At least on the surface. The air around them buzzed with silent tension, like a fuse had been lit and tucked beneath the table. Lucille reached for her purse. Shaq stood, towering above the cafe's umbrella-covered seating. The table next to them went quiet, not out of respect, out of recognition. The kind that only comes when the joke suddenly grows legs and stands 10 feet tall. As Shaq helped his mother out of her chair, he glanced once at Grayson, not with threat, with patience, that kind of patience that knows timing is everything. "Y'all have a nice afternoon," Lucille said with the grace of a Southern woman who'd seen too many boys raised by pride and not enough by conscience. They walked off, slow and steady, like the moment hadn't mattered. But it had. Later that day, one of the kids at the cafe recorded a snippet of the exchange. Not the insults, just the moment Shaq looked at Grayson and walked away. The video hit the internet by evening. Someone added a caption, "When a king doesn't need a crown to check a clown." By morning it had over 2 million views. But none of that mattered to Shaq. What mattered was what Lucille said in the car on the drive back. "They think they know you, but all they've ever seen is the shadow, not the man." He nodded, both hands on the wheel. The city passed them in blurs of brick and sky. "Sometimes," he said, "you gotta let 'em laugh. Makes the silence louder when the board shifts." Lucille smiled. "You planning to shift it soon?" He didn't answer, but in the back of his mind he was already counting pieces, already watching for openings. Not for payback, but for the perfect move. A move they'd never see coming. It started like most things in this era do, with a clip, 18 seconds, shot from a shaky phone just outside the cafe, where Shaq had stood next to his mother, silent and still, while Grayson Carter's smug grin faded beneath the weight of a gaze he wasn't prepared to meet. There was no sound, no context, no clear insult captured, just the look. That look. The kind that made even internet strangers pause before hitting play again. Someone added music, soft piano keys rising beneath Shaq's stillness. Another user spliced it with slow-motion footage of chess pieces falling. A caption followed. "He didn't say a word. He didn't have to." Then came hashtags "Done Big Shaq Energy," "King Without a Crown," "Brains versus Brawn." The internet, ruthless and rapid, began to churn. By the time Shaq opened his phone the next morning, the clip had racked up 3 million views and made its way onto trending tabs across multiple platforms. He scrolled past the comments without reacting. Some called it inspiring. Others mocked it. A few drew the lines clearer than the others dared to. "Bet he doesn't even know how to play chess." Just standing there looking confused. Typical. Come on, y'all. Let's not pretend like dude's the next Bobby Fischer. Imagine being that rich and still not educated enough to sit at a board. Shaq exhaled slowly and locked the screen. Across the room, the community center's chess tables were already being arranged by a few of the kids. They hadn't seen the video, or maybe they had, but they didn't bring it up. They just smiled when they saw him walk in, nodding with that quiet excitement only children can carry. They didn't need explanations. They didn't see a meme. They saw their mentor. But the world outside that room didn't move on so quickly. At Hartbridge University, a school so drenched in ivy and ego, it practically dripped, the original offenders were regrouping. Grayson, Brody, Celeste and Holt sat in their common room, huddled around a laptop as the clip played for the 5th time in an hour. "This is ridiculous," Grayson muttered. "They're acting like he Gandhi'd us into checkmate or something." "You did say he probably couldn't play chess," Celeste reminded him with a tone that almost dared him to deny it. "Yeah, offhandedly. It wasn't even loud." Brody clicked away from the clip, opening a private student forum that had lit up overnight. One thread read, "Shaq the silent genius? LMAO, anyone want to challenge him for real?" And just like that, the idea was born. Grayson leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Let's do it." Holt frowned. "Do what?" Grayson turned toward the window, watching students pass below. "We issue a public challenge. A chess match. Shaq versus me. Right here. On campus. Friendly. Fun but public." Celeste raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like damage control disguised as sportsmanship." "No," Grayson said slowly, his mind already shaping the narrative. "It's image correction. I challenge him in good faith. Offer the board. If he declines, we look gracious. If he accepts," he let the implication hang. Brody caught on first. "You beat him. The internet sees what it wants to see. Brains back on top." Celeste shook her head. "You sure you can beat him? I've been state ranked since I was 15.
That's not what I asked.
Grayson ignored her. Later that day, the challenge dropped via an open video on the university's Instagram page. Grayson stood in front of a sleek chessboard inside Hartbridge's library. Blazer on, hair styled, posture tight with practiced ease. "Mr. O'Neill," he said with a polished smile, "it's come to my attention that some footage of our recent interaction may have gone viral. I'd like to extend an open invitation to join me, here at Hartbridge, for a friendly game of chess. One board, 2 chairs, 1 afternoon. No animosity, just 2 players, sharing the game." The tone was crisp, professional, and practiced. But everyone heard what wasn't said. The memes responded before Shaq did. Brains versus brawn. The final match. Goliath can read now. He better bring a calculator for those endgames. Watch him move the knight like a rook. Late-night shows got in on it, looping the original cafe clip with audio of Jeopardy's thinking music. Podcast debated the optics. Commentators speculated Shaq would decline, call it beneath him, avoid potential embarrassment. He didn't. He released no statement, no clip, no response at all. But 2 days later, a letter arrived at Hartbridge University's administration office, typed on plain paper, signed in Shaq's bold signature. "I accept." The date was set 2 weeks from Friday. On campus, open attendance, live streamed. The university leaned into the media frenzy, securing permits, booking press slots, adding outdoor seating. Hartbridge's chess club agreed to officiate. Celebrities tweeted their predictions. Sports analysts broke down Shaq's body language, as if it were part of the game. In the background, Shaq moved as he always did, quietly and with purpose. He didn't hire a trainer. He didn't speak to the press. But every night, after the last kid left the community center, he stayed alone with the board. Reviewing strategy, replaying famous games, testing positions blindfolded. Not because he was afraid to lose, but because he understood what was at stake had nothing to do with kings or queens. It was about perception, about what America decided to believe when a black man sat down at a table built to exclude him. Lucille watched from the kitchen some nights as he studied. She said little, just moved around him, silent support. But one night she paused, looked at him across the board, and asked softly, "You doing this for you?" Shaq looked up. "No." She nodded, satisfied. "Then you'll win." Elsewhere, Grayson trained too, but with a different energy, competitive, arrogant, fueled by the promise of vindication. He played with assistants, ran simulations, practiced trash talk in the mirror. This was his moment to reclaim the narrative, to turn mockery into a platform. He didn't care if Shaq knew the game. He only cared that America would watch him win it. As the day approached, the anticipation built to a cultural boil. News outlets called it the match of minds and myths. Blogs questioned the deeper implications. Think pieces popped up about race, class, and the legacy of underestimation. Shaq said nothing. But his silence wasn't absence. It was pressure building. And the people who'd known him longest, the ones who understood the difference between stillness and surrender, knew something was coming. 3 days before the match, Shaq received a package, no return label. Inside was a chess clock, vintage, wooden, well-worn, and a folded note. "I taught you to play. Don't forget why you stayed." No signature. He stared at the clock for a long while before setting it on the center table, its ticking a soft echo in the room. The media kept pushing. Grayson did more interviews. He smiled wide and talked about community and respect. But the edges of his voice still curled with that same old condescension. One anchor asked if he was nervous. Grayson laughed. "I've played champions. I think I'll be okay." Shaq watched the clip that night and didn't react. He wasn't thinking about interviews. He was thinking about the boys at the center, about how they'd watch the match and take notes, not on chess but on how to carry themselves under scrutiny, how to breathe through doubt, how to let the board speak louder than the noise around it. The night before the match, Shaq walked through the community center alone. He paused by the wall where dozens of photos hung, smiling faces, old events, chess tournaments, first trophies. He stopped at one, a blurry shot of him kneeling beside a 10-year-old boy, showing off his first checkmate. That boy had aged out of the center, went to college on a scholarship, first in his family to do so. Shaq smiled faintly, not for himself, but for what was coming, because this match, this setup wrapped in silk and smugness, was no longer just about him. It was about every kid told they weren't smart enough, polished enough, worthy enough to sit at certain tables. And now, the table was set. 2 chairs, 1 board.
No more talk.
Only moves. The world thought it was watching Shaquille O'Neal prepare for his first real chess game. They were wrong. They mistook his quiet for unfamiliarity, his calm for fear, his silence for hesitation. They saw a man who had built an empire with strength, with charisma, with presence, and assumed he had never learned to think in shadows. They saw a player stepping onto a board he didn't understand, but Shaq had been here before. It started 3 decades ago, long before the cameras, before the crowds, back when he was still just a tall, angry kid with too many thoughts in his head and nowhere to place them. His father was strict, his world chaotic, and his body already too large to be invisible, but too young to command the respect it deserved. That kind of pressure doesn't scream, it's... The local YMCA was where his mother sent him one summer, desperate to get him off the streets and out of his own storm. It wasn't basketball that saved him. Not then. It was the old man in the corner, hunched over a scarred wooden chessboard, moving pieces with the patience of a surgeon and the silence of a ghost. He went by Mr. Wills. Nobody knew his real name. Nobody asked. But every afternoon he sat in the back room under a buzzing ceiling fan and waited for the world to slow down. Shaq watched him for days before speaking. When he finally did, it was just one word. Why? Mr. Wills looked up from the board and answered without blinking. Because it teaches you how to fight without swinging. And that was the beginning. Shaq never told his friends he was going. He'd sneak out at night, sometimes after practice, sometimes skipping it entirely. Mr. Wills didn't smile much, but he noticed everything. He didn't explain pieces like most teachers. He explained intent. He taught Shaq to look beyond the move and study the man, to ask himself not just what the piece could do, but why it was there in the first place. You don't win on the board, he said once, tapping his temple. You win in here. Within a month, Shaq was beating other kids. Within 3, he was beating the instructors. But Mr. Wills warned him, pride'll make you sloppy, stay hidden, let the world underestimate you. Shaq took the advice to heart. He started playing under the name JD on underground online platforms and community tournaments across the South. The initials weren't random. They stood for just different, his own way of staying anonymous while building a name that began to whisper through low-level circuits. And JD could play. He never played for money, never for trophies. Just the thrill of prediction, of building mental traps, of letting opponents think they were in control right up until they weren't. He walked away from the game when college took over, when basketball drowned out everything else, but the instinct never left. The board lived in the back of his mind like a shadow that moved when no one else could see. So now, as the media mocked his silence and Grayson prepped like he was going to outwit a tourist on his first trip through strategy, Shaq trained the only way he knew how out of sight. The nights were long, not with sweat, but with stillness. He didn't hire a coach. He didn't need one. Every evening, after the center emptied and the city fell into quiet, Shaq laid out his old board and opened the journals Mr. Wills had left him. Notebooks filled with annotated games, diagrams and riddles disguised as lessons. He lit a candle some nights, just to feel the past closer. The flame flickered against the ivory and ebony pieces as he replayed hundreds of famous games in reverse, forward, and blindfolded. He tracked every defense, Caro-Kann, King's Indian, Sicilian, Slav. But he wasn't just learning strategies. He was studying people. Grayson's interviews became fuel. Every smirk, every slip of arrogance, every word laced with thinly veiled superiority. Shaq recorded it in his mind like puzzle pieces waiting to be matched. He built psychological profiles the same way he used to build defensive reads on the court. Grayson's hand twitched every time he doubted a move. His eyes scanned left when he was baiting. His fingers tapped when he was bluffing. These weren't just tells, they were patterns. Patterns that would fall apart under pressure. And Shaq was pressure personified. He never said a word about the old days. Not to Lucille. Not to the media. Not even to the kids at the center. He didn't need to, because for him, silence wasn't absence. It was design. The more they underestimated him, the easier the fall would be. He wasn't out to humiliate. That was Grayson's game. His goal was simpler, sharper, to redefine. The night before the final week of prep, Shaq drove out to the YMCA. The building had changed, fresh paint, new staff, but the energy was the same. He stood outside the old back room and stared at the chair where Mr. Wills once sat. where the board used to rest like a sacred altar to thinking men. A young boy inside was playing against himself, pieces clacking in the low light. Shaq watched for a while, unseen. When he finally turned to leave, he muttered under his breath, "Thanks, old man." In the final days leading to the match, rumors started swirling. Chess circles began wondering about Shaq's untraceable preparation. An anonymous online forum revealed that a user named JD had once placed top 5 in a regional bracket years back, under a fake name, with an address that traced back to a P.O. box in Georgia. It didn't take long for connections to be drawn. Speculation ran wild. Could it be him? Was Shaq JD? He didn't confirm. He didn't deny. The truth didn't need to be spoken. It needed to be played. In those final hours, Lucille came to visit him at the center. She walked in with a bag of groceries and a side glance. "You still playing under fake names, baby?" she asked, with a grin. Shaq chuckled. "I stopped being someone else a long time ago." She raised an eyebrow. "Then why ain't you told them who you really are?" Shaq set a bishop back on the board and met her eyes. "Because they need to see it, not hear it." Lucille nodded slowly. "Then make sure they look real close when you start." That night he ran one last simulation. No music, no distractions, just the clock ticking, the weight of each move rising like a tide. He didn't know if the world was ready, but the board was, and so was he. 3 days before the match, an envelope slid under the front door of the West Park Community Center. No postage, no name, just a plain white envelope, with thick creases and a corner smudged with what looked like oil or dirt. Shaq wasn't the first to see it. One of the volunteers found it while sweeping the front lobby. It was early, just past sunrise, when Shaq arrived. The building still held that morning hush, walls not yet echoing with footsteps, windows fogged lightly with the warmth of the heaters, battling the cold outside. The volunteer handed it over without a word, but their eyes said enough. Shaq opened it slowly. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "Don't show up. Some things aren't for you." No signature, no stamp. Just a sentence cut from the gut of something uglier than fear. Certainty. The kind that hides behind anonymity and counts on silence to stay powerful. He stared at the words for a long moment, then folded the paper, tucked it into his back pocket, and walked into the main room to set up the chessboards. He didn't mention it to anyone, but that same night something else arrived. Only this time it wasn't quiet. Spray paint. Crude, red letters across the back wall of the center. "Know your place." It was big, ugly, rushed but loud. The kind of message that didn't want conversation. It wanted submission. The city tried to get a crew out to clean it, but by the time they arrived the next morning, the wall was already painted over. By the kids. Every one of them showed up early that day with brushes and rollers. Some brought paint from home. One of the kids, 12-year-old Caleb, stood up on a milk crate and traced the outline of a new mural. 3 bold black kings at a chessboard, their shadows stretching like roots across the wall. At the center of the table sat a faceless man in a hoodie, his hand raised above the board mid-move. They didn't need instructions. Shaq stood in silence, arms crossed, watching. He didn't cry, didn't speak. But inside, something deep and ancient stirred, something that tasted like rage, but settled as resolve. The news picked up the story the same afternoon. Photos of the graffiti. Footage of the mural being painted over it. Commentary rushed in from every corner. Some supportive, some skeptical, some hiding behind the veil of just a game. But for those who knew it had never just been a game, it was an invitation to diminish, dressed up as a chess match. And now the tension spilled beyond the board. The threats kept coming. Some online, some through voicemail, some whispered in ways only certain people could hear, always with the same undercurrent. Stay in your lane. But every threat only made the lane wider. Community leaders began to speak up. Pastors, educators, local athletes. They didn't name names, but their voices echoed in pulpits and classrooms. "This match," one pastor said during his Sunday sermon, "ain't about chess. It's about who's allowed to think, who's allowed to win without apologizing for it." The story shifted. National anchors invited analysts to debate not just the game but the culture around it. Headlines evolved. Shaq's chess match sparks conversations on race, power, and perception. Brains versus brawn, or just America's favorite underestimation. Shaq remained silent through it all, not because he had nothing to say, but because silence used properly speaks louder than any microphone. Inside the community center, the kids felt the shift. They came to practice earlier. They studied harder. They asked sharper questions, not just about chess, but about how to carry themselves when the world expected them to shrink. Shaq answered with patience, with stories, with silence that forced them to listen between the lines. One afternoon, a young boy named Rashawn, barely 9, asked him straight out, "You scared, coach?" Shaq didn't lie. "I'm human," he said. "Being scared means you got something worth standing for." Rashan nodded slowly, as if turning the words into armor. Outside, the storm kept building. Flyers were defaced. A mock account pretending to be Shaq posted doctored images, making him look foolish. It was taken down, but not before it spread. In response, students at Hartbridge started organizing. Not everyone bought into Grayson's clean-cut image. An open letter appeared in the campus paper. "We were told this was about sportsmanship. It's not. It's about who gets to own intelligence in America." Petitions followed. Requests to remove the match from campus grounds were denied. Instead, university staff increased security and scheduled a press conference, which Grayson attended with practiced charm. "We're here for unity," he said, standing in front of the Hartbridge crest, "and we're excited to welcome Mr. O'Neill with respect and civility." It was a performance, and the cameras drank it in. Behind him, Holt shifted uncomfortably. Celeste didn't speak. Brody avoided eye contact with the reporters. Afterward, in private, Celeste finally spoke up. "You really think this ends with a handshake and a joke?" Grayson turned toward her slowly. "It ends how it needs to." She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. Meanwhile, Shaq prepared in his own way. No team. No briefings. Just quiet mornings with Lucille, evenings with the kids, and long nights with the board. He moved the pieces slowly, thoughtfully, the way someone reads old letters, careful not to tear what still holds meaning. One night, Lucille found him in the back room of the center, staring at the mural the kids had finished. She stood beside him, arms folded. "You ever wish it was just a game?" she asked. Shaq shook his head. "No," he said. "Because if it was just a game, it wouldn't matter this much." She nodded. "You got a plan?" "I got patience." "That's enough?" "For now." 2 nights before the match, someone slashed the tires on his SUV. No cameras, no witnesses. But the message was clear. Stay home. Stay small. Stay silent. Shaq called a tow truck and never brought it up again. Instead, he walked the next morning to the center, nodding at every neighbor on the block. Every door he passed, every child who waved, every elder who whispered prayers in his direction. It all stacked quietly in his chest. By then, the energy around the match had changed completely. It was no longer entertainment. It was a line in the dirt. The day before the match, Shaq received a letter. Hand-delivered. No threats this time. Just words. Typed neatly. "We expect you to lose. Kindly. Quietly. Gracefully. Don't make this ugly." Shaq folded the letter in half and set it beside the first one in his drawer. He didn't tear it. Didn't burn it. He kept it. Because that, too, was part of the story. The morning before the match, he stood outside the center one last time before leaving. He looked at the mural, now finished. 3 kings, faceless, and proud. In the middle, the man in the hoodie still hadn't moved his piece. He would tomorrow. And they wouldn't be ready. Not for how he moved. Not for what that move meant. Because this storm hadn't been weathered in vain. It had been gathered piece by piece across decades of doubt, whispers, insults dressed as jokes, rooms where he was too big to ignore but too black to fully welcome. Now, the sky above him felt heavy. Not with fear.
With reckoning.
And Shaq was ready. Not to fight. To play. Shaq finally spoke. Quiet. Steady. No point. Just playing. The words were gentle, but they hung in the air like thunder. By move 12, the crowd could feel it. The rhythm had changed. The arrogance that Grayson wore like cologne began to evaporate. His hand paused between moves. He glanced up, caught sight of a nearby monitor showing the live stream, where over 2 million viewers were tuned in. The match, now 20 minutes in, was no longer about who could win. It was about who could hold on longer. Shaq didn't gloat. He didn't push fast. He didn't bait. He played clean, calculated chess. Move 17. A sacrifice. Shaq gave up a bishop. A beautiful piece traded with surgical foresight. The sacrifice unlocked the queen. Gasps again. Grayson's brow furrowed. He began muttering, not insults, but calculations, trying to reorient, trying to find an opening that wasn't there. You shouldn't be this good, he finally whispered, more to himself than to his opponent. Shaq leaned back. His voice didn't rise. I've been good for a long time. Y'all just never asked. The moment hit like a slap, made of silence. Around them the crowd seemed to shift as one. Eyes widened, phones lifted. For the first time, the match stopped being about something, and started being something itself. A truth made visible, a statement, made in moves, not slogan. Grayson tried to reset. He repositioned, switched to a defensive setup. But he was late. Too late. Shaq had already taken the center. Already pulled his strategy into a loop. Grayson couldn't unwind. At move 23, Shaq castled. At move 25, he captured Grayson's rook. At move 27, he locked in the queen. And then came move 30. Check. Grayson froze. The board was quiet. The air was thinner now, like everyone watching had forgotten to breathe. He stared at the position, trying to find a line of escape. Shaq's pawns flanked like bodyguards. His queen angled from the far side of the board, protected by a knight. Grayson hadn't even seen move. There was no exit, only delay. The referee stepped forward. 3 minutes remaining on the clock, he announced. Shaq didn't look at the clock. He didn't need to. Grayson lifted his hand, stared at it, then slowly moved his king one square. Shaq responded immediately. Knight to g5. Check again. Grayson exhaled through his nose. The move that followed was slow, almost reluctant. Then Shaq played the final combination. Knight, queen, slide, trap, checkmate. A beat of silence. Then the referee's voice. Game over. Mr. O'Neill wins. The crowd didn't erupt. Not yet. First, there was stillness. The kind of stillness that falls when something breaks in real time. An illusion, a barrier, a bias. Then came the clapping. Not all at once. It began near the front. A few students, then faculty, then volunteers from the community center, and then a wave. A rising rhythm, thunder from hands that had once carried doubts, now carrying awe. Grayson didn't stand immediately. When he finally did, he reached out to shake Shaq's hand. His palm trembled slightly. Shaq stood, towering but calm, and accepted the handshake without a word. No smile, no mockery, just a... Then he turned toward the crowd. Lucille stood near the back, arms folded, eyes proud. The mural flashed in Shaq's mind. The faceless king, the unmoved piece. But now the piece had moved, and the world had to reckon with where it landed. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Grayson Carter had planned for dominance, for effortless control. He'd pictured himself sitting across from Shaquille O'Neal, letting the crowd laugh when the wrong move got made, letting the tension build, and then snapping it with a quick endgame that left everyone wondering how Shaq ever thought he stood a chance. But somewhere around the 9th move, Grayson stopped seeing a victory and started seeing a wall. A calm, immovable wall of patience and precision. Shaq's hands never trembled. His posture never changed. His eyes, half hidden under the shadow of his hoodie, tracked the board with surgical calm. Grayson had expected hesitation, maybe even fear. But what he got instead was a man playing with a confidence, not born of arrogance, but of experience. Real, sharpened, underground experience. Move after move, Grayson found himself in positions he didn't anticipate. Traps disguised as opportunities. Delays that looked like blunders, until it was too late. He adjusted. He recalculated. But the rhythm was slipping through his fingers. And then came the 12th move. Shaq sacrificed a bishop. On the surface, a bold but reckless risk. Grayson smirked. He knew this kind of play. It was emotional, impulsive. He pounced, capturing it, opening what looked like the side file for attack. But by the 14th move, he realized what he'd opened wasn't a flank. It was a door into a position that gave Shaq a central file advantage, pulled his rooks out with precision, and began a slow positional squeeze. Grayson couldn't untangle. He started to sweat. Across the courtyard, the crowd's energy began to shift. What had started as amusement, let's see the big guy fumble, was evolving into a kind of hushed astonishment. People leaned forward, phone cameras tilted, voices quiet. Something was happening. And Shaq? He was just beginning. As the 16th move played out, brief flashes interrupted the present. A sequence running quietly beneath the surface of his mind. The smell of bleach in the back room of the YMCA. Mr. Wills sliding a pawn forward in the low light. Always protect your silence. Let them play themselves tired. The sound of chalk scraping across an old board in a forgotten diner on the outskirts of Jacksonville. A man named Felix, who used to be state-ranked before prison took his license. Your queen ain't power unless you know what she's worth. The whispered crowd at a midnight warehouse tournament in Macon, Georgia. The air thick with cigar smoke and unspoken wagers, playing under the name JD, against a man who once coached a junior Olympiad finalist, winning in 23 moves, quietly, leaving before anyone could ask for a name. All those moments, unrecorded, untold, braided themselves into Shaq's stillness. Now, because he hadn't learned chess from books, or masters or trophies. He'd learned it from ghosts. Grayson tried to adjust again, brought his queen out too early, hoping to force a trade. Shaq ignored it. He repositioned a knight instead, blocked the angle, limited escape routes. The crowd gasped again. From the side, Brody watched with growing panic. He wasn't a chess expert, but even he could see Grayson was floundering. Celeste leaned forward, whispering, "He's 3 moves ahead of you, at least." Grayson didn't respond, because he already knew. By move 20, his position was collapsing. It wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. Shaq didn't go for flashy attacks. He strangled space. Every move was a conversation Grayson didn't want to have. He tried playing faster, hoping momentum would help. Shaq slowed down. He took 15 seconds to move a pawn, 30 to slide his rook. Grayson's fingers tapped the table again. Then his thigh. Then his watch face. He looked up once and saw Shaq just watching him. Not smug. Not gloating. Just waiting. A few feet away, a group of students from the center sat in the front row. Rashawn, Caleb, Ellis. Their eyes were wide, their mouths slightly open. They weren't just watching Shaq win a match. They were watching him undo a lie. A lie that said the board didn't belong to them. Grayson moved again. Desperate. He exposed a square in his back rank without realizing. Shaq didn't take the bait. He reshaped his formation instead. Move 25. Grayson escaped, but only barely. He was breaking down now. Posture tight. Jaw clenched. He leaned too close to the board, hoping proximity might reveal an exit. The audience leaned in too, captivated, unnerved. Because somewhere around move 28, something changed in them as well. They stopped rooting for an underdog story. They started confronting the idea that maybe they'd been wrong all along. A woman in the second row whispered to her friend, "He's not learning this on the fly. That's prep. That's training." Another student said, "He's playing real lines, like elite level." The murmurs grew. Then someone tweeted a theory. What if Shaq was JD? Within minutes, it spread. Old game archives, username threads, forumins from the early 2000s, dozens of games posted under the pseudonym JD Clean, strategic victories logged in Southern regional circuits, often entered with fake emails or phone numbers traced back to YMCA addresses or PO boxes. A video clip resurfaced from 2007, low resolution, shaky cam. A tall figure with a hood over his head sat quietly across from an older man in a dusty basement room. No commentary, just the clack of pieces. A short match, clean, efficient. And when the camera panned back for 1 second before it cut, just before the winner stood to leave, a tall silhouette passed into the frame. The comments exploded. "That's him. Shaq been in this." Whole world thought he was guessing. By the 30th move, the internet had turned. No more memes. No more jokes. Now they were watching a masterclass in humility, in patience, in quiet power built over years and years of being doubted and dismissed. And still showing up, still playing, still winning. Grayson's next move was forced. He barely made it. Shaq paused before responding. His hand hovered over the knight. Then he moved it to e4. The final choke point. Grayson exhaled sharply. He looked around, desperate. At Brody. At Celeste. At the referee. But there was nothing to be done. No shortcut. No flag to throw. Just one move left. He placed his fingers on the king, lifted it an inch, and then set it down. Checkmate. But the real silence didn't happen there. It happened the moment Shaq stood and walked away. No bow. No fist pump. Just the man who had been underestimated one move too long. Lucille met him off to the side. She didn't speak, just nodded once. The crowd followed him with their eyes, unsure what to clap for. His win, or their own awakening. Behind him, Grayson stared at the board. His hands rested on the table, as if trying to steady a version of himself that had been shaken loose. Later during a post-match press conference, he was asked, "When did you realize you were outmatched?" Grayson hesitated, then answered honestly, "When he let me think I had a chance." The sun hit its apex as the 17th move unfolded. 17 wasn't a long game, not by chess standards, but it felt like an eternity when you were sitting across from a man the world told you you'd beat, only to find yourself exposed, undone, and dismantled before you realized it had even begun. Grayson didn't understand how it had unraveled so quickly. He was supposed to be the strategist, the elite, a player who'd once scored top 3 in the East Coast Invitational. But as his king stared down a closing corridor of rooks and knights, pinned by angles he hadn't even registered, he knew what had happened. Shaq didn't just play better. He played smarter, colder, cleaner. Shaq's 17th move wasn't loud. It didn't flash or leap across the board. It was quiet, inevitable. A rook sliding from f8 to f2, supported perfectly by a bishop that had remained hidden in plain sight since move 6. It cut across Grayson's back rank, like a wire pulled taut and silent across a hallway. And then came the queen, already in place, waiting. The final net tightened with a precision Grayson had never faced before. He looked down at the board. Checkmate. For a second he said nothing. No dramatic sigh. No shake of the head. Just stillness. The audience took a moment to register it, and then the hush fractured into sound, gasps, murmurs, a rustle of chairs and camera shutters clicking like thunder rolling in reverse. No one moved right away. They didn't know how to react, because they had spent the past week building a caricature out of the man in the hoodie, and now the caricature had dismantled everything with 17 surgical moves. Shaq didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He reached across the board, offered his hand. A simple nod. "Thanks for the game," he said. His voice didn't rise above the noise. It didn't have to. Grayson looked up. His eyes were wet, not with tears but with something heavier. Shame. Real burning shame. Not because he lost, but because deep down, he hadn't thought it was possible. He shook Shaq's hand, but his grip was loose. Shaq stood. A single movement. No celebration. No fist pumping. He didn't play to defeat Grayson. He played to teach him something. And now the lesson had landed. The referee approached the mic. Match concluded. Checkmate at 17 moves. Victory to Mr. O'Neill. It wasn't just Grayson's hand that dropped. It was the weight of perception breaking in the minds of everyone watching on the lawn. Behind their screens, across every stream, and feed broadcasting the event in real time. The phrase "Shaq wins chess match" started to trend instantly, but it was followed quickly by 17 moves, no mercy. Grayson Carter silenced at the board.
The hoodie master.
Shaq's strategist. Not just a legend, a legacy. But none of those headlines mattered to him. He stepped down from the platform, walked through the stunned audience, and made his way to the edge of the lawn, where Lucille stood beneath the shade of a sycamore tree. She didn't clap, she didn't cheer, she simply looked up at him, chin high, and smiled. "I see you moved your piece," she said. He nodded. Time was right. She reached up, straightened the seam of his hoodie where it had folded. "You gave them more than they were ready for. Wasn't for them. Who was it for?" Shaq looked past her, toward the kids from the community center, all standing now in a huddle, grins wide, eyes burning with joy. For the ones who think before they speak, and the ones who get told to shut up before they ever do. Lucille patted his chest once, and walked beside him as the crowd finally began to react. Applause swelling, some cheers rising, others still frozen in place, phones raised, mouths open. Shaq kept moving. Back near the platform, Grayson still sat at the board. Brody stood behind him, speechless. Celeste had turned away from the cameras. She wasn't embarrassed for Grayson. She was ashamed of herself, for playing into it all, for letting the mockery slide, for never once considering that the man they laughed at might have been holding back for a reason. Later that night, Grayson would appear on a live-streamed press panel. He wouldn't dress like himself. No blazer, just a t-shirt and slumped shoulders. When asked how did it feel losing so quickly, he answered with a shaky laugh. "I didn't lose to a beginner, I lost to a ghost." The press didn't get it, but the chess world did. Because the anonymous player known as JD, long whispered about in backroom tournaments and online circles, was real. And now he had a face, a name. Shaquille O'Neal. The story broke wide within hours. Underground players from Atlanta, Memphis, Baton Rouge, all came forward. They remembered him. Tall, quiet, hoodie always up, played clean, always left early. Never asked for payment, never offered his real name, just moved through the game like a whisper in the dark, teaching lessons without taking credit. They didn't know who he was then. Now they did, and it shattered something that had lived long in the bones of institutional thought. This idea that muscle meant simplicity, that kindness meant naivete, that a black man in a hoodie must be learning, not leading. Shaq had reversed it all in 17 moves. That night, interviews poured in. Networks begged for sit-downs. Podcasts sent requests. Publishers called. Shaq didn't answer. He went home, grilled dinner with Lucille, played Uno with 3 of the kids who came by after the match, and ended the evening folding towels while a documentary played in the background. Grayson, meanwhile, issued a public statement 2 days later. The press expected a PR-approved apology. Instead, they got honesty. "I misjudged him," he said. "Not just his game, his presence. I played a man I thought I could beat because of who I believed he wasn't. I was wrong." To his credit, he didn't blame the media. He didn't shift the spotlight. He sat with his failure. It didn't make the loss go away, but it mattered. At the community center, the energy shifted too. Kids walked in with their heads higher. Parents lingered longer during pickups. A new set of sign-ups filled the board. Chess classes tripled in size. Volunteers came in from 3 new schools. Donations rolled in. And someone dropped off a custom chess table with Shaq's name carved into the side. He didn't move it to the center. He put it in the back, where the quiet was, where thinking grew best. Lucille made sure it had good lighting. The mural on the outside wall was updated too. A new detail added. The faceless man in the hoodie now had a hand on the rook. Not just playing the game, controlling the board. 1 week after the match, a reporter finally caught up with Shaq during a charity event. She asked, carefully, "How does it feel to prove so many people wrong?" Shaq tilted his head and answered slowly, "I didn't play to prove them wrong. I played so the kids watching knew it was okay to be right, and quiet about it." And with that, he turned and joined a group of young boys practicing openings on picnic tables, stopping only to adjust the position of one kid's knight. As the reporter watched from a distance, one of the kids looked up and asked him, "Coach, did you know you were gonna win?" Shaq smiled. "I didn't go to win. I went to finish." And in that, he'd done more than win a chess match. He delivered checkmate on an entire system of expectation, not with force, not with fame, but with 17 moves of undeniable truth. The moment the match ended, the world didn't quite know how to react. There had been cheers. Sure, applause, headlines, trending tags, but beneath the surface, something deeper stirred. Something quieter. It was more than a win. More than a celebrity outsmarting a smug Ivy League student. It was the crack of a larger mirror, the kind that had reflected only certain types of brilliance for far too long. In the days that followed, the tone of coverage shifted fast. Reporters who once joked about Shaq fumbling pawns now scrambled to book experts who could analyze the 17-move match like it was a presidential speech. Analysts on cable shows broke it down frame by frame, not just the strategy but the composure, the psychology, the deliberate restraint Shaq displayed throughout. One anchor on a major network opened with the words, "We underestimated him. That's the truth of it. And maybe we need to ask why." Podcasters followed suit. Even the loudest critics, those who had written off the match as a publicity stunt, were now hosting chess masters and educators, asking what it meant to watch someone like Shaq dominate, not just physically, but intellectually, and do it with such chilling ease. Memes didn't disappear, but they changed. Gone were the goofy edits and mock checkmates. Now they showed Shaq's stoic face over black and white boards, with quotes layered on top. Think 3 moves ahead, not just on the board. The king doesn't talk, he plays. They don't fear the strength. They fear the silence. But it wasn't just online. The most visible change happened in the places that mattered most. The community centers, the classrooms, the kids watching in real time. At West Park, things moved fast. New faces started showing up every afternoon. Parents from neighboring districts brought their children to enroll in the chess program. Donations tripled, then quadrupled. The board of the nonprofit voted unanimously to expand the program to 5 more centers across the state. Shaq didn't take a salary. He paid for new boards out of pocket. He ordered chairs himself. When volunteers tried to name the program after him, Shaq's gambit, he quietly declined. "This isn't mine," he said. "It's theirs. Let them name it." Eventually, the kids chose a new name: The Quiet Game. Within 3 months, chapters of The Quiet Game opened in Charlotte, Birmingham, and Detroit. Retired players and former grandmasters volunteered their time. Online classes began streaming, and every session opened with the same phrase Shaq once told Russia: "Being scared just means you've got something worth standing for." Grayson Carter, once framed as the brain of the elite, wasn't seen for several days after the match. Rumors swirled. Some said he dropped out, others that he was avoiding the press. But when he finally resurfaced, it wasn't through an agent, a PR firm, or a news segment. He uploaded a 6-minute video. It wasn't scripted. He sat in a dorm chair, no blazer, no background music, just him and a camera. And he spoke. "I didn't lose a chess match," he said, voice calm but exposed. "I got educated. About arrogance. About assumptions. I spent years believing I was entitled to the center of the board, and I never questioned why. Shaquille O'Neal beat me in 17 moves, yes, but what shook me wasn't the speed, it was the silence. The way he didn't need to prove anything before he moved. He just moved, and we weren't ready." The video went viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. Raw, a rare piece of humility in a space where image is everything. Celeste reposted it with a caption: "Growth is a move too." Even Holt, who had remained silent through the controversy, shared the video with one sentence: "I watched a man sit still and change the world." Back at the community center, Shaq watched none of it. He didn't engage with the hype. Not because he wasn't aware, but because he understood how quickly narratives flipped. Applause today could become mockery tomorrow. Praise didn't change the structure, only action did. He kept his head down, played his games, listened more than he spoke. At one point, a reporter managed to corner him outside the center.
Mr. O'Neal, do you have any response to Grayson's apology?
Shaq paused, then said simply, "Takes strength to apologize. Even more to change. And what about revenge? Do you feel vindicated?" Shaq's eyes narrowed. His voice dropped an octave. "The board teaches you more than the streets ever could," he said. "One game, one loss, one win. It ain't about that. It's about how you carry yourself after. About who you teach with your next move." That quote spread just as fast as the memes had, and this time, it made it into textbooks. School programs began integrating chess into their curriculum, not just as a game, but as a tool for teaching logic, patience, emotional control. Educators wrote proposals to the Department of Education citing Shaq's match as cultural proof of how chess could build focus and reduce behavioral incidents in underserved schools. At a national education summit that fall, the keynote speaker ended her address with a photo of Shaq at the board, and the words, "Sometimes the quietest player makes the loudest change." It wasn't just schools. Corporate spaces began hosting chess tournaments for team building. Mental health professionals referenced the game in therapy sessions with at-risk youth. Even prison rehabilitation programs adopted it, building classes around strategy and long-term thinking. One day, a letter arrived at West Park. Shaq opened it himself. "I'm an inmate at Red Hill Correctional. I watched your match. I watched every move. I haven't thought about anything other than revenge in 12 years. But that game, that changed me. Thank you for showing us there's power in restraint." It was signed, formerly angry, now focused. Lucille kept the letter. She added it to a drawer full of others' handwritten notes, drawings from kids, folded pages of praise that Shaq would never post, never boast about. "You do realize you started something, right?" she asked him one evening as they cleaned up after a long session. Shaq smiled. "I didn't start it. I just moved my piece." She laughed. "Baby," that move echoed. Meanwhile, Grayson enrolled in a public policy class focused on systemic inequality. He withdrew his name from several speaking engagements and joined a tutoring program, helping local middle schoolers with critical thinking skills. He never asked to reconnect with Shaq. But a year later, he showed up at a Quiet Game event in DC, not as a guest, as a volunteer. He took a seat beside a boy named Jalen, taught him how to recognize a queen trap. Didn't mention the match once. He didn't have to. The board remembered, and so did the people. Shaq continued to avoid interviews. He let the programs speak for themselves. The impact didn't need translation. It was seen in the eyes of a girl from Atlanta, who beat her first adult player. In the father who told his son, "You don't have to raise your voice to win." In the teacher who put up a poster that read, Every move tells a story. Eventually, a documentary crew approached Shaq. They offered a generous budget, full creative control. They wanted to title it, Checkmate, the Man Who Outsmarted a Legacy. Shaq declined. If you're doing it for the title, you missed the point. He agreed only when they changed the name. 17 moves. Not a celebration, a study. The final shot of the documentary wasn't the match. It was a quiet scene from West Park. Shaq sitting across from Rashawn, watching the boy move his queen with unshakable focus. You see it? Shaq asked him. Rashawn grinned. Already knew it before I touched the piece. That was the legacy. Not the game. The growth. Not revenge.
But redemption.
Not noise. Echo. The man shook it. Briefly. Then walked away.
That was enough.
As the session wrapped, the warden entered quietly. You're not just teaching the game, she said to him later in the hall. You're teaching them how to breathe again. Shaq nodded. The board don't judge. It just waits. A week passed. Then 2. Then 3. The program expanded. 20 inmates. Then 30. Other facilities called. More requests. More boards shipped. Shaq kept showing up. No press. No footage. Just presence. Meanwhile, the Quiet Game Initiative hit public schools in 4 more states. One kid in St. Louis beat his principal at a school-wide match and got a scholarship offer by fall. Another girl in New Orleans used her story of learning chess during suspension to write an op-ed for the city paper. In every center where the program opened, a quote hung on the wall. They saw a giant. They missed the mind. Lucille had picked it because she remembered when the world tried to shrink her son into his own shadow. Now his silence had grown louder than their judgment. Back at West Park, the original mural had been updated again. This time it stretched across 2 walls. The faceless king still sat at the board, but now across from him sat a younger version of himself. Smaller, focused, confident. A mirror, a legacy. One afternoon during a routine session, Shaq faced Rashawn again. It had been months since the match with Grayson. Months since the explosion of media attention. Things had calmed, but something different was in the air that day. Rashawn sat across from him with a quiet intensity. The room buzzed softly with other games, but theirs drew a small circle of quiet around it. They opened slow. E4. Knight to floor. Pawn to D6. It was clean, strategic. No wasted moves. By the 10th move, Shaq leaned back. You've been practicing, Rashawn grinned. Every day. By move 15, Shaq paused. Rashawn had forked his queen and rook. Shaq leaned forward, smiled, sacrificed the rook. But Rashawn didn't chase. He closed the center, built pressure. By move 22, the tide shifted. Shaq recognized the setup. A slow crush, knights controlling space, pawns protecting angles. It was what he'd done to Grayson. And now it was being used against him. By move 29, Rashawn advanced his bishop. Check. Shaq blocked. Then it came. Move 32. Queen slides into position. Checkmate. Shaq stared at the board, then looked up. Rashawn wasn't gloating. He was smiling. Not wild. Not loud. Just proud. Shaq laughed, long and loud. He stood, reached across, and clapped the boy's shoulder. That's how it's done. The room, sensing something bigger had just happened, broke into applause. Soft, genuine. Lucille watched from the hallway. She didn't clap. She wiped her eye and walked outside into the light. Inside, Shaq reset the board. Offered Rashawn another game. The boy shook his head. Not today. You told us know when to walk away. Shaq chuckled. You've been listening. I always do. The two of them sat there a moment longer. Quiet. Not awkward, earned. The sound of pieces being picked up filled the air around them. Outside, a breeze moved across the mural. Inside, Legacy had made its last move. Not in victory, but in passing. The last piece was never about power. It was about permission. To think. To grow. To outplay the box you were handed. And now, someone else had picked it up. If this story made you pause, good. Now imagine what happens when we stop underestimating silence and start investing in minds that were never given the board. This isn't the end of the match. It's just the opening move. Your next move? Think bigger. Think deeper. And never overlook the quiet ones. They're the ones rewriting the rules.